Okay, in this PowerPoint, you have some basic information about the history and development of school counseling as a profession. And we'll take you up through the Ask a National model. And then over the course of the rest of the semester, we'll be exploring the more contemporary perspectives of school counselors and where the profession is right now. This is the type of information that you can expect to see on the Praxis subject area assessment and the National Counselor exam as well. Okay. We're going to cover some basic or significant historical events and legislation that you need to know, some elements and issues related to the professional identity, and overall that relationship between school counseling as a specialty area within the larger counseling profession. School counseling began as a guidance movement. And some of you will still hear counselors in your schools called guidance counselors. That is not the term that's used anymore. The term that's used currently is professional school counselor, and we'll talk about that towards the end of the PowerPoint. But we did emerge as a profession. This school counseling began to emerge as a professional specialization within counseling during the Industrial Revolution. The primary goal at that time was to assist students with occupational selection and placements. There was a very strong career focus at that point. And in 1913, the National Vocational Guidance Association was founded. This was as a direct result of Frank Parsons' work. Frank Parsons, as we just mentioned, he's often called the father of guidance and counseling, and he organized the Boston Vocational Bureau. That was in 1908, and then the association was developed back in just a few years, about 5 years after that. Eli Weaver was another founding member of the professional specialization of school counseling, and he organized guidance services in New York in 1908. And Jesse Davis, so you'll hear of Parson and Davis they were the most visible and active, but Eli Weaver was in there as well. First person to implement, Jesse Davis was the first person to implement a school guidance program in Detroit. World War I had a strong impact on school counseling because during that time the U.S. military used intelligence testing to screen and classify draftees. So at this point, testing and assessment was being used as a basis for selection, and that heavily influenced what happened in the school counseling arena. In the 1920s, you saw the progressive education movement that was led by John Dewey. Some of you who have come from an education background will have studied Dewey and Dewey's work in your educational core classes. That work focused on the school's role in guiding students in their holistic selves, the personal, the social, their moral development. What is the role of schools in helping students develop as full and complete people and who contribute to society? And then in 1935, the American Council of Guidance and Personnel Associations was developed. This became AACD in 1993, and it's ACA today. See, school counseling emerged as a specialization within that larger counseling profession. And when we're part of we are counselors, and we're going to cover that pretty heavily throughout this class. Then in the late 1930s, you had trait and factor theory, which emerged, and this emerged as one of the first theories of guidance and counseling. And E.G. Williamson wrote How to Counsel Students, which at that time indicated that counselors were to dispense information and gather data to influence and motivate students. So our focus on data and data-driven programs, this is not new. This is from 1939. What we know is that we want our practice to be evidence-based. We want to utilize the data and information that's available to us and use that to develop really good programs that meet the needs of our students. And in terms of meeting the needs of our students, we're trying to develop our students, remember, to be really good citizens, to be strong, whole people who are able to tap into all parts of themselves. At that time, Williamson's 6 steps for assisting students included analysis, synthesis, diagnosis, prognosis, treatment, and follow-up. Now here we say it's rather medical, but actually what it is clinical. It was a clinical focus. I kept the medical statement in there because sometimes school counselors have this view of themselves as education professionals who are not engaged in some of these avenues. But from our history on, we were clinical professionals in school settings. And now we weren't called clinical professionals, but we were professionals who were there to meet these broad-ranging needs for students, to provide them with these services and supports that were evidence-based. We utilized the information and the data available to us. We analyzed what was happening to students and synthesized everything we could figure out about their contextual issues. Contextually, what are all the pieces impacting how they're able to perform in the educational arena? And then at that time, there was a focus on diagnosis and prognosis. We do not do that as school counselors at this point. but we are certainly prepared to utilize a diagnosis if it comes into us from an outside clinical professional to help integrate that information into our work with students. In the 40s, we had Carl Rogers' influence become more apparent within the profession. At that point, his focus was on growth rather than information, and so that developmental focus was incorporated into our work. It was much of what Dewey suggested already, but we're having this melding together of many different ideas. So from World War I, we had a heavy focus on assessment and data, using data and information to make assessments and determine interventions, right? And then we get Carl Rogers' focus on the developmental nature of helping through relationship, right? And so as we start to meld those pieces together, that at times has created some tension within the profession, but it also really suits what we do. It really suits what we do in the school systems and how we connect with students and families, and also how we connect with the educators and the principals, administrators up the chain. World War II, the government also had an influence. We had the George Barden Act of 1946, which included a reorganization of the Guidance and Personnel Branch of the U.S. Office of Education. And then in 1953, we had the first professional organization for school counselors founded, the American School Counselor Association. That's still the premier organization for school counselors, both nationally and internationally. All right, some legislation that has affected counseling through the years. In 1958, the National Defense Education Act passed. This is a direct result of the space race, right? So when Sputnik was launched, we were in a scramble to catch up. We wanted to be strong scientifically and to be able to reach new bounds, just like other nations. I was going to say our adversaries, but just like other nations, right? Many of the basic goals of NDEA also matter to us today, right? To improve student aptitude scores, to encourage students to stay in school and pursue college, to provide scholarships for students to attend college, and it also increased funds for education to help increase the number of secondary school counselors to help with college admissions. So again, we're back to that focus of, like, as a nation, we need a better prepared job force, and we think school counselors are in a good position to help with that preparation. So there's some funding goes in to put those school counselors into high schools. It helps school counseling in two ways. It provided funds to help states maintain school counseling, testing, and other guidance services, and it helped to establish counseling institutes and training programs in colleges and universities to provide better training, better access to the professional development experiences that people needed to become effective school counselors. And then in the 60s, Gilbert Wren published The Counselor in a Changing World. And that shifted the focus a little bit of school counseling to focus on counseling all students based on their individual needs. So between 1958 and 1960, the late 1950s, early 1960s, there was really a surge of support for school counseling. We saw huge increases in the number of full-time counselors. We saw more money being put there. We saw more counseling training institutes being funded. So, and we also began to see, this was a pretty critical piece, was up the chain, like in higher level state administration, there were positions for school counseling consultants, like student support service consultants. Then in 1965, we had the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. This provided funds and supported special programs to help schools improve educational opportunities for students of low-income families. So at that point, we began to see more targeted focus of school counselors to meet the needs of students who were typically underserved. And in the 1970s, we had a shift in guidance and counseling from a crisis-oriented focus to comprehensive program orientation. And really, like we say, a crisis-oriented focus, but at that time it was like a targeted, prior to that time, it was really like targeted intervention. So a war drove focus on assessing students to determine abilities and help track them into certain paths that would be better suited to serve the nation, right? Then we had a career focus, and then we have individual student need focus, like what are the needs there, and then the underserved, and then we shifted to this focus on like to bring all of those pieces together in the 70s into a comprehensive program orientation. That was a help to us, and that has continued to evolve into like our national model. And then in 1975, we had the Education Act for all handicapped children. This mandated that schools provide free public education for all students and provide federal financial aid for such programs. In the 1980s, accountability rose to the top as one of the major buzzword in education and school counseling. Now, we will remember that all along we've used data and information to formulate assessments and render decisions about interventions. But then we shifted in the 80s to this focus, like, what is the impact? What is the impact? And this helped counselors. The Nation at Risk publication, that helped counselors because it provided evidence for the need for support services for students. So many states began to develop guidelines. It started with just a few states, but then it went on. Developed guidelines for comprehensive school counseling programs. And then in the 90s, we had a nationwide survey in 1998 that revealed that approximately 50% of states had developed comprehensive school counseling programs. And what we know is that if reports come out and say, well, 50% have done this, well, that other 50% fell more behind. And so we saw more and more states developing those comprehensive school counseling programs. So what's the difference with guidance and counseling? Like, why do we not say we're guidance counselors? Because guidance is much more limited. Guidance is focused on advising and providing information. And though we started with a focus on advising, it quickly evolved to include other components, and even initially included some other components, right? So what we do now is much more broad than just guidance. With guidance, you would think you would provide parent information, referrals to outside agencies, maybe some college testing information, maybe some course selection information, and then like classroom guidance. But in counseling, your comprehensive counseling programs, you've got an emphasis on exploring personal and social issues. You've got individual counseling, group counseling, you're providing support services in a range of capacities, maybe through some parent education, maybe through some individual sessions with parents. Maybe you've got parents, children, and the siblings coming in for some initial school-based family counseling services to meet family issues, to address family issues. You're helping stakeholders from many different areas with personal problems or special needs. You're also providing that classroom guidance. You're providing some support to educators about classroom management and connecting with building communities of learners in their class. Like, those are skills you have as a school counselor and you will be asked to share. It's much broader than just guidance. The other piece that you're providing through your counseling are those, when we think about special needs and supports, is that you connect your stakeholders to external community services. That's a critical piece of what you do. And that goes far beyond the work of just advising or providing guidance. So the national standards for school counseling programs, we're going to learn a lot about the national standards. And in some areas, there'll be some disagreement. In our discussions, we'll find some disagreement. We'll find some pieces that we think are aspirational, more than actually in practice in some places. We're going to talk about all of that. But our national standards for school counseling programs was ultimately a culmination of the evolution of this profession, and the pieces that were articulated all along. You'll see pieces of Davis's work, Parsons' work. You'll see pieces of Dewey. Like, all of these are incorporated. All of what was learned and how the profession evolved is incorporated into that national model. And it says that school counselors should address student needs and issues in these following areas: academic, personal, social, and career development. Accountability, we've got within, and you see how all feed into each other. You can't take one piece and leave it without the others, right? Like, they all connect. You've got accountability, including results reporting, school counselor performance evaluations, program audits. You've got your delivery system. That's your guidance curriculum or your classroom counseling pieces. Your individual student planning, your responsive services and system support. Your foundation, that's our beliefs, our philosophies. The mission statement, what is your mission statement? What is for the partner project, you'll be asked, what is the mission statement for the school counseling program? What is the mission statement? What's the mission statement for the school? How do they fit together? How do they connect? And how are you very intentional about the work that you're doing there? In your management system, agreements, advisory council, using data, action plans, time, calendars. Like, what are the pieces that are included in your management system? And the outside, we're going to talk about this in more depth when we discuss the national model fully and using the text. But for this outside boundary, advocacy, leadership, and collaboration, systemic change. Advocacy, leadership, collaboration, systemic change. Advocacy, leadership, collaboration, systemic change. These are critical pieces, and they all inform our practice and connect us with the larger